Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my YouTube channel where we discuss the Lord's Recovery Movement, also called the local church movement of Witness Lee. We've been making the argument on this YouTube channel that the Lord's Recovery Movement is a controlling, abusive religious group, sometimes known as a cult, although I don't use that term myself. I could see how somebody would use it. One thing about that term is the Lord's Recovery has often protested it, complained about it, even sued about it. But one question they never seem to think to ask is, why would people call us that? It is a good question because, as the saying goes, if it looks like a duck and it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it just might be a duck. The Lord's Recovery never seems to consider that, well, maybe we should change some of our patterns of behavior and practices to look less like something like that. I believe that they have a mentality God cannot accomplish his purpose without some kind of strict, closely knit, very disciplined, controlled group like this. And so they excuse this type of stuff, so-called like that they're a special army for God and the sacrifices have to be made in order for God to complete his purpose. Jesus coming back to earth is all dependent on them doing their job. And so they have this mission, and the end justifies the means with them. They feel like they can do all this stuff and get away with it because the end justifies the means. I'm not sure what you do with that mentality except warn against it, because the people that are sold out to it are kind of unreachable in the first place. They've turned their minds over to a failsafe sort of thinking. There was a novel in the 60s, I believe, and a movie called Failsafe. And it was a story about during the Cold War when we had these bombers that could go bomb the Soviet Union. And the pilots and crews were trained that after they got to a certain point on their mission to Moscow, nothing caused them to turn back. Even the voice of the president on the radio, the voice of their commanders, even their wives, they were taught to ignore because the Russians could fake all this stuff to try to stop them. So once they reached the point of no return, they had to complete their mission. So as you might imagine in the story, it was a malfunction that caused them to be sent to Russia. They got into Soviet airspace and they started getting messages from America saying it's a mistake, turn back. And in the end, they ignored them and they blew up Moscow. Failsafe was kind of an ironic name because failsafe means it cannot fail because you have enough safety measures in for every contingency. Well, in the movie, they didn't. They didn't have a contingency for that situation where they should turn back, but they've been trained not to. And it's kind of the same thing in the Lord's Recovery. They've been trained to ignore any criticism, to consider anything negative as a kind of a attack of the devil. So you reach a point where you can't even hear the warnings of those who are telling you the truth. And it's very sad and it's completely unnecessary. Ironically, that's what unbelief is. And I'm going to make an analogy here just to make a point. And that is, Jesus said that the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit is the only unforgivable sin. Well, what is the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit? It's basically saying the Holy Spirit's evil. And if you think about it, somebody who holds on to unbelief to the very bitter end of their life, eventually at some point in their being, what they're saying is, this voice that's telling me to turn to God is evil. It's not something I need to listen to. It's something I need to turn away from. It's bad. Don't listen. Plug your ears. Bury your head in the sand. Turn away. Stay away. Like Jesus said, their darkness is their light. And that's the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit. That's where you reach an ultimate point where you reject the last voice that could save you. Because once you've completely rejected the Holy Spirit, there's no way for God to reach you. It's the thing that touches your heart. And if you can't hear that, if you push that away, if you say, no, 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 I'm not listening to it, I'm not going to hear it, it's bad, I don't want it, stay away, then you're pretty much done. Well, it's a similar thing with this siege mentality that the Lord's Recovery people have, where they get to the point where they cannot hear the voice of reason. And I'm not saying they're committing blasphemy of the Holy Spirit. That's not my point. I'm saying that they've hardened their hearts against anything that contradicts their message because they've convinced themselves so much that nothing can be contrary to it. And once you have this mentality, which they have, that do not listen to anything contrary to what we tell you, it's bad. Don't have an open mind. That's basically what they're saying to their members. Do not have an open mind. Close your mind. Listen only to us. Well, I know I make things sound absurd sometimes, and that's part of my point. But it's really accurate. That's really what they do. They treat any contrary voice like it's something to be avoided. It's not to be thought about. It's not to be considered. It's not to say, let me think about what you're saying. They don't want their members to think. As I said before, basically the Lord's Recovery is selling a product. Think about it in very, very general terms. They are selling a product. They have something they're selling. Okay, I'm not saying they're trying to make a profit, but they're saying we have something good. We'd like you to consider taking it. And we're going to make this case that you do. Anybody else in the world that does that, well, they try to make their products look attractive. They tell people the advantages of it, and when it's in a world of just human commerce, there's a lot of false advertising and stuff like that. But for the most part, a company or anybody that has a message that they're selling needs to sell their message, and part of that is being open-minded and responsive to criticism. If somebody makes a breakfast cereal, for example, and they say, this is the best breakfast cereal ever, we're the breakfast cereal of the age. Eat this breakfast cereal and you will have no more problems in your life. And somebody comes along and say, this stuff, not only is it unhealthy, it tastes lousy. Oh, how dare you say that? You're an opposer. Stay away. Don't listen to him. Eat our breakfast cereal. Eat it up. And as a matter of fact, if anybody says anything bad about our breakfast cereal, that's a sign that you need to run into the kitchen and pour yourself another bowl. Gobble down some more. Don't think about what it tastes like. That's the lie of the enemy. Don't think about the contradictions in our claims. You just need to make yourself another bowl. This is really the way they do. I mean, I know it sounds ridiculous, but it's what they do. That's what they tell their members to do. Don't consider anybody that says anything contrary to what we teach. And if you find yourself being tempted to think about it, that means you need to go read some more of Witness Lee's ministry. That will stop these voices that are telling you there's something wrong with it. And this is what's known as a siege mentality. This is what the Lord's Recovery employs. And it is a very unhealthy mindset, as you can imagine if you try to think about it objectively. If you go about this in any other aspect of your life, you would eventually get yourself in deep trouble. It's called living in denial. If you deal with somebody who's trying to sell you something that has this kind of mentality, and you do business with them, you're going to get messed up because they are not interested in the truth. They're interested in what they want to be true. And their means by which they ascertain the truth is invalid. The way to ascertain the truth is to stay open-minded to all options and examine all pathways adequately, and to remain humble and open to the fact that you might be wrong and you might have gotten off track. But the Lord's Recovery does not do that. They are locked into a mentality which was originated by a man who's been dead for 22 years, and they're stuck in that. I don't know what's more amazing, the fact that they actually continue to get followers, or the fact that these leaders have been in this mentality for so long and they haven't figured out where they are. Innocent people are getting hurt by this. They're getting sold a bill of goods and then they're getting hurt. I'm not saying that there aren't some good things there, but the fact is those things are not dependent on this type of behavior I'm talking about. If you've got Christ, if you've got the Holy Spirit, then that's because of God's grace. It's not because you're something great. Christ and the Holy Spirit and the gospel can be found in a lot of places. You don't need this type of thing where you sell this other stuff to people. How they need to stay in your group to remain in the best. It's just unnecessary. And I'm not sure what purpose it serves other than to sell books, sorry to say. What's going to happen if people stop buying their books? What's going to happen if people stop coming to their trainings? What's going to happen if their sales dry up? These guys aren't going to have any income. I'm sure in the back of their mind somewhere they worry about this because they actually get on churches that don't have their regular monthly purchases of ministry materials. This kind of stuff just stinks. I mean, it really does. It's wrong. So they've generated this siege mentality in their membership in order to hold them there, in order to sell more of this stuff. Now, that might sound pretty cynical, but I think the evidence is pretty strong that some of that's going on. Why else would they need to try to keep people there? Is it just pure social pathology? Could be, but there are liable to be some filthy lucre there too. But why the siege mentality? Why is it necessary? Why can't they be open? Why can't they be humble? Why can't they consider the fact that perhaps their message is flawed in some way? Maybe the reason people call them a cult is that they display characteristics of one. Maybe the reason people are suspicious of them is that they act suspiciously. Maybe the reason that they are unpopular is not because they're so pure, but because they have problems. I think you have to just look around and look at the track record of history and ask yourself, if this was God's pure move on the earth, why would God work so hard to make his pure move on the earth look like an abusive religious group? Something to consider. That's it for now. Take care.